Today's guest is someone who's quietly reshaping the way we think about our homes, not just how they look, but how they perform. Since launching ENBEE in 2014, Natalie has built a reputation for transforming inefficient, tired homes into highly performing, beautifully designed spaces. Her work sits at the intersection of design, sustainability, and practicality, combining natural materials with intelligent building strategies and what she calls a fabric-first approach to retrofit, focusing on insulation and long-term performance. Now, before founding ENBEE, Natalie worked across several respected architectural practices and even spent time in Jamaica, yeah man, running a furniture design company, and a journey that clearly shaped her hands-on, material-led approach to design. What's particularly interesting about Natalie, or what I find particularly interesting about Natalie, is that she's not just designing homes, she's challenging the industry to rethink how we can upgrade existing housing stock for the future, making sustainability not just aspirational, but achievable. Natalie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for being here. Thanks so much for giving up your time. Natalie, I'm just going to kick us straight off. What was it in you that decided that you really wanted to become an architect?
So when I was a little girl, my parents had some outhouses which were part of basically my grandparents bought a house in Wales. It was a farmhouse set in the middle of some fields about a couple of miles away from the sea. My parents must have bought the outhouses off them, and they decided to develop them. And I'm not sure how old I was, maybe 9 or 10 by this point. My dad, who was a real sort of big bon vivant character who liked to get everyone involved in things. He was very good at directing people. Invited a whole load of friends down. I think it was an Easter, and we spent our Easter holidays demolishing the outhouses. And there's a lovely photo of me and my 2 brothers all up a ladder each in a very sort of 1970s non-health and safety way, taking nails out of the corrugated iron roof. And then lots of people got involved, and my godfather was involved in the design and some of the building work. We had some friends come down another time who built the foundations. And so it was a very hands-on family thing that we did, family stroke community thing. And at the end of it all, I remember our cottage and my grandparents' cottage was at the end of this lane, and there was you'd drive up the lane and then go over a little cattle grid, and then there was a field that was my grandparents' field with a couple of donkeys, and then at the end of that field was the two cottages. And I remember just as we went over the cattle grid saying to my parents, is somebody who designs buildings an architect? And they said yes. And I said, I don't know if I voiced it, but it was like, that's what I want to be. So I made that decision. I think I was 12 years old at the time.
Sounds like the most idyllic childhood anyone in the world could have ever described. That's beautiful.
It was pretty good.
Yeah. Were you going to say something else? Sorry, I jumped in.
Well, it was just that later I discovered I had all the right skills for it. So I made the decision before I knew I had the skills. So yeah.
It's one of those things. I wonder if it was that you'd made the decisions and then subconsciously you grew the skills to do it, or maybe you just unearthed the fact that the skills were there along. I don't know. Who knows? We won't get too Freudian. Going back into your childhood, do you think there was anyone in your family that kind of shaped your ambition to do what you do now?
Well, my dad did have a very big influence. He ran his own business. He was a carpet dealer. He was really well known in London. He had loads of famous clients. And so I witnessed the sort of entrepreneurial journey of my dad. And in fact, I think pretty much all his kids, I don't think any of us worked for some, he had 5 kids altogether, and I think we all work for ourselves. Yeah. So I've got 2 brothers who are artists, one who runs an art gallery, and a brother who's a joiner, does really beautiful high-end joinery. And then me as the architect. And we're all in the art side, arty side of things. And yeah, so I think he had a big influence.
I can relate to that enormously. And though we've never met personally, my father as well was an enormous character in Newcastle upon Tyne in the 70s, 80s and 90s. And on some level, there's part of me that almost feels like a poor reflection to him, but I'm trying my best to live up to it. But I know exactly what it's like to have such a charismatic parent. Do you think that knowing that your dad was an entrepreneur and a business owner, has that shaped how you see risk today?
I was thinking about it actually this morning. There was I remember because he sold really expensive carpets, and they would sometimes not sell something for 3 months. And in fact, they had a pool table in the basement in the shop because they'd get bored, waiting for
Of course.
the customer to come in. And I remember him saying to me, "I haven't sold anything for 3 months," and I was just so used to it. I was like, "Oh, it's going to be okay, Dad. It'll be fine." And so I think I saw that thing of that you can have ups and downs and you can have patches where you're waiting for something to happen, and to keep that faith that things will eventually turn around. I think that's helpful when you have to keep that level of optimism when you run your own business.
Very much, very much. Well, let's get talking about what you're building now. Please tell us about ENBEE and when you founded it.
Yeah, so I stopped as an architect for 10 years or maybe 12 years. I had my youngest child in early 2003. And I wanted to be a stay-at-home mum. I wanted to be there for them. I've got 2 boys, and I was in the lucky position that my partner was earning enough so that I could do that. My mum had been a stay-at-home mum, so that's my mum's influence. And so I did that, and then when I came out, that sort of when I started thinking about starting up again, I remember meeting up with some friends who said, if you go back now after 12 years of not working, you're going to have 26-year-olds telling you what to do, and you'll be back down at the sort of bottom of the the ladder. And I was like, don't know if I fancy that. So, and I also wanted to still be able to pick the kids up from school and still be available. So I started in a much more, I would say it wasn't really a business at the beginning. It was like more of a hobby where I was making a bit of money, and it wasn't sustainable at the beginning either. It was just that a few people offered me some work and I started working. In fact, having run a £11 million project on site for Allies and Morrison, that was the last project I did. And I'd have meetings with 20 people on site, things like that. The first project I did when I went back, which went to planning, was for a window. So it was a big drop.
Sure.
But it was with me being in charge. I wanted to be in charge. I'd been in charge of myself, running my family for 12 years. I wanted to stay in charge.
Well, let's just look at that. Now, I know budgets are completely different from where I'm based in the Northeast to where you are in London, but let's say somebody came to you and your practice with £100,000 and a typical tired UK terraced house. Where would you start with, say, the first £25,000 or £30,000 to make the biggest impact on that property in terms of performance and renovation?
In terms of performance, like if we're looking at just insulating the building, because if we're just looking at performance, I would be examining what they have to start with. So do they have single glazed or double glazed windows in place? Do they have any loft insulation in place? So we'd look at those first. So if there's no loft insulation, I would be putting in 300 mil of loft insulation just across the ceiling, not a room in the roof, just because that's the cheapest way you can do that. Then I would examine whether windows needed to be changed. The windows have a huge heat loss because they can have U values of like 5 to 7 for a single glaze, say, sash window. But they also, you lose a whole load of heat through air leakage. So I'd be looking at that. So the regular things of windows and loft, which we've all been told to do for years. However, the thing with windows is they are very expensive to replace. So you could easily spend 40 to 60,000 just replacing the windows, and there's your budget gone.
Yeah.
Then the other thing I would look at is the walls, the insulating the walls. And that all depends on, it's so much easier if the property doesn't have a beautiful period facade that you can then cover up and insulate from the outside, then you're able to do it without much disturbance internally. However, if you have to go internally, then that again puts the price up. What I'm seeing, 100,000, you've mentioned, I'm seeing retrofits like that. We split our contracts for VAT purposes to do the retrofit separately from the main contract. And so we do a retrofit contract, and my retrofit contracts are tending to be around 100,000 to 150,000 for the projects that I work on. And they only include the insulation and the air source heat pump. They don't include the windows. So my feeling is really that the government should be giving a lot more money towards supporting retrofit. In Italy, they gave 150,000, and there was a really big take up. And I think they would, if say 50,000 was given to people, and then they could make up the rest, that would really encourage a lot more retrofitting.
I fully understand what you're saying. Now, when you go into a home, I'm assuming the ideal is that someone comes to you first before they start a renovation or start a project. That's never the way that the world seems to work. And I think there's a perception in most people's mind that sustainability in architects can be very expensive. What's the most common mistake that you see homeowners or developers make when renovating, assuming they haven't come to you first?
Well, it's quite well documented, because generally the people I work with have come to me first. But it's quite well documented that there are unintended consequences with retrofitting buildings, and if it's not done properly with sort of building physics and science involved in it, then you can end up with problems and have trapped moisture, which then can grow mold. Ventilation might not be done properly. Leaks might not be dealt with properly. There is a whole science to it. There also is a skills gap. So I think more and more architects are learning how to do it, and there is a skill set going up on that side of things. There are also retrofit coordinators and retrofit assessors. There's a whole set of training schemes out there. Builders are starting to get there, but it's a slower thing. So they're not aware of. A lot of them aren't aware of the science, how it actually works. They might just go to their local builder's merchant and buy the materials that are available there. Generally, they're not the safest materials to use because there is a whole science behind it, and the safest materials are the natural materials. They make a really big difference to the risk factor of doing up a building. And we don't work blind. I mean, if I look at how people used to work, it was very much like you put all the materials together and you weren't necessarily... they were based on sort of maybe recommended details that other people had developed. But now you can model the build-up. So all our build-ups are modeled. They're modeled for U values, they're modeled for moisture, they're modeled for airtight. Well, we're aware of how to make them airtight, and we test the airtightness at the end. It's quite geeky and scientific, and certainly not the way I thought I would end up working, but I actually really love it because I have a geeky streak to me.
To be honest, I think you've actually already answered my next question, which is going to be, I think the perception of sustainability is seen or could be seen as expensive. But I was going to say, long or short term, where do you think the saving is to the customer or the person?
There's savings in so many ways. Like, there's so many benefits to doing the work with natural materials. There's the reduced risk of problems down the road. And so the people, you hear stories, and they've been on the BBC. People have got various, even Trustmark accredited fitters to put in insulation, and something's gone wrong with it, and they've ended up with a house that's got covered in mold, and then it's making them unwell. So you don't want to go from a cold, leaky house, which is really uncomfortable and difficult to live in, to one that's worse. You want, they've spent money. It's going to be really psychologically difficult to deal with it, but themselves being in a worse position. There's that reduction of risk of using the natural materials, because the reason why they work better with old buildings generally, or in fact any building, that in particular old buildings are vapor open. Vapor open is a term that people don't necessarily, it's misleading in what it sounds like.
What does it mean? I don't really know what it means. I nodded to be helpful, but I don't really know.
No, the words that really, no, vapor open is actually not, it's the a breathable construction is the one that's misleading. What it means, a breathable construction is a vapor open construction. What it means is that vapor can pass through the construction and come out the other side. So what that means is in our old buildings, they're generally vapor open, and we create loads of steam and moisture in our buildings. And from cooking, breathing, something like 4 pints of moisture per person per day. It's huge. Tons and tons of moisture gets produced in our buildings. And if it doesn't get managed, it ends up condensing on the walls and creating, or within the construction, which is worse because you can't see it, and then creating mold growth. And that is bad for health. In fact, and that can cause asthma and cause breathing issues. And I've stayed somewhere where I could smell the mustiness, and then I went to the bathroom and there were all these inhalers, and I was thinking, okay, I can see the direct effect here. So there's a whole health aspect with using, as well as not having to take it all off because it's all gone wrong. There's the health aspect of the air always being, the moisture is being managed by the building. And the reason for that is, so on our existing buildings, which say we've just got an old brick wall, the moisture is passing through it. It's also heavily ventilated by all the gaps in the building, all the air that's coming up through the floorboards, air that's going up chimneys, air that's passing through windows because they're not airtight. When we do the work, we make the windows airtight, we block off the chimneys, we stop the air coming in through the floor. So we stop what's called uncontrolled ventilation, and then we turn it into controlled ventilation. So we have a ventilation system that works with the building, and it's set to give the optimum amount of good, high quality air to the occupants. And there's a couple of ways you can do it. There's a MVHR system, which is mechanical ventilation and heat recovery, which recovers 90% of the heat lost when you chuck the air out. Or there's one which doesn't have a heat recovery. It's called demand controlled ventilation. And that one works. It gives you less air coming in, cool air coming in, because the way it basically has these moisture sensitive pistons within the air inlets, which open and close according to how much moisture is in the room. So if the room is dry, the pistons will shut and the air doesn't need to come in. And so you get less heat loss that way. So there's 2 different approaches. So sorry, I've gone on to ventilation, but I just want to touch more on the insulation. I'm sorry, I can talk forever about all these things.
That's why we're here. So
again, just on the why I believe natural materials are better, well, I'd say no, is this. So I saw a colleague of mine on a podcast. She just was talking about PIR versus, she was talking about, I think it's called decrement delay. It's the delay of heat gain on a material, biomaterial, an insulating material. And so let's just say that the different materials can reduce heat loss in a similar way because of their U values. But one way you can really see a difference is in the summer, because natural materials have this heat. They absorb heat slowly, but they can absorb heat and it's on my software. When I look at the software and I put a build up together, I look at how long is it going to take this build up to absorb heat. And it can be 12 hours, 10, 12, 14 hours that it's absorbing heat and keeping the space cool because it's absorbing heat. Now, I thought it was 6 hours that it took PIR to absorb heat, but I heard my colleague yesterday on a podcast say it was 2 hours. So if it's 38 degrees outside, within 2 hours, it's going to be 38 degrees inside. Whereas the wood fiber insulations or cork or hemp blocks, they all have this slow heat absorption. and it will take 10, 12, 14 hours, depending on the thickness of the build-up, to absorb the heat. And you want that whole day, you want it to be that sort of 10, 12, 14 hours, because you want to capture the heat during the heat of the day, and then it cools down at night. So that's a really big one, as well as all the health benefits. I could go on forever about the benefits.
No, I mean, you're incredibly thorough in that answer. To be honest, I don't want to lose anyone who's listening, because it is fascinating and it is important. But when there must be things, which is evident in your last answer, that when you look at a house, when you're first walking into a property, you must analyze a house in a completely different way to the way that I would as a developer or even a homeowner would. What are the three things that you're looking for when you go into a house that probably people like me would miss?
I look at what the wall is. So I look at whether it's a solid wall or a cavity wall. I look at what kind of mortar it has, whether it's got a cement mortar or a lime mortar. It seems like they seem like bonkers things to be looking at when I drive them. Those things are telling me certain things about how I can retrofit the building. And I look at whether the building's got any render on the outside, because if it's got render, we can more easily retrofit on the outside of the render. If it's got cement mortars, cement pointing, not mortars, cement pointing. If it's got cement pointing on old bricks, that can often damage the bricks, and you might see bricks spalling and bricks cracking as a result of it. That is because you really want it to be lime-based pointing, because when in the winter bricks get wet and in the summer they dry out. And when they're drying out, you want them to be able to dry out as quickly as possible, but the cement pointing prevents them drying out as in a way that lime pointing doesn't. Lime pointing allows the bricks the whole thing to dry out properly. So I look at that, and one of the reasons I look at that is when we insulate internally, if there's cement pointing, we have to take it off and replace it with lime. So that's one of the things I look for. Let's see if there's a third thing I look for. The floors are quite important, because a slab floor is harder to deal with than a suspended timber floor. A slab floor, either have to break it out or we have to raise the height of it to insulate over the top. Whereas a suspended timber floor, we can take the floorboards off and insulate in between the floorboards more easily. In between the joists, under the floorboards.
To some people that are listening, a lot of this stuff will seem like, oh gosh, that seems so modern and all of the. If we could fast forward 10 years now and jump way into the future, what do you think is the main change that will be happening in 10 years' time that's not happening now, that affects the way that we renovate and live in homes in the UK?
Well, I think energy security is huge. Like, we saw a big jump in energy prices with the beginning of the Ukraine war, and now we're getting the same. The thing about retrofitting is you're reducing your need for, so let's just say we've got an ongoing energy crisis that is sort of happening over time, and it sort of flares up over time. And so prices have gone up massively. Now, it was really easy to have low performing houses in the UK because we have a temperate climate that doesn't get too hot and it doesn't get too cold. And so it didn't matter that our houses were highly leaky and didn't perform very well. They're beautiful, but they can be uncomfortable to live in. It didn't really matter because we didn't have temperature extremes either way. Now we might not get particularly cold temperature extremes, but we're certainly going towards getting heat temperature extremes. Energy has become more and more expensive, and yet we're chucking it out the window. It's literally, I don't know if anyone who is listening to this saw the Channel 4 House Without Bills, which was brilliant. There's a great bit of footage where they test the windows of the presenter, and you can just see, because it gets tested with smoke, and you can just see the smoke just pouring straight out the window. Yeah. And that was his heat. That's your heat going straight out. So in the future, anyone who wants to have greater energy security, the more they can reduce their heat demand and also need for cooling in the summer, the better position they will be in, basically. And so I think that there is an increasing demand for it, and I just think it will keep being that demand. Now, I like to combine it with beautiful design because that's where I originated. So that combination of to have a really beautiful property that doesn't perform well and loses energy, I don't think will have the same value as one. I think there will be this thing where an A-rated building or a B-rated building is highly desired, and I have seen that is like I have seen reports that Rightmove have put out to say that is starting to happen. People are going to want to buy a building, buy a new property that they don't necessarily have to do all the retrofitting to themselves. It will become something that's desired, just like a nice bathroom or a nice kitchen or a nice extension. Those are all desirable features to add to a property. That's what I think because everyone's going to need energy security.
Well, that leads us on perfectly to my next question, which is, from a developer's point of view, as I would be, what if I said, and I really want your honest, I can take it. So you give me the unadulterated truth. If I said, look, I don't care about sustainability, I just want maximum profit, what would your answer be?
I think you're being short-sighted. I think if you look into the work that's going into for highly sustainable projects, there is a lot of excitement around them. There's a beautiful development going on in Lewis where they're trying to do. They've got all my heroes in the industry were brought in as the sort of board of advisors, and it's all built. It's like at least 4 stories, maybe taller housing, all timber construction, all natural materials. And in my view, that is the future. The industry is in flux. It's in change. There are RIBA targets. There are LETI targets. The whole thing is changing at the moment. There's a massive change, and it's changing towards a much more natural way of building with rammed earth, having clay finishes, and they're building with all sort of lots of wood and naturally grown insulation. There is a move towards that. It's still niche, it's still small. I still haven't heard that the natural material market has gone up to 2% yet. So it's very small compared to the rest of the market. But it's the future. I don't build a cavity wall, for example. I would never have a brick and block cavity wall with insulation between. I don't build those. We build in timber frame with a brick facade, which is hung off the front of it. Or we build with like porotherm blocks, which are insulating blocks. We're looking at building with hemp blocks. There's different ways of building which are much more advanced and overall, in my opinion, the future.
Is there a question that you think I have not asked about sustainability that's important that I should ask? And if so, what's the question?
I feel like I've covered quite a bit of it. Oh yes, impact. This is a good one. So for years, I had the understanding that the impact of buildings on the environment in terms of how much carbon if you've got your whole pie chart of all the carbon that's produced around the world and how much of that is attributed to buildings. I'm going to ask you, do you know?
Unfortunately, and I'm very embarrassed to say, not a clue, Natalie. Please enlighten me.
Okay, so the reason I did that is because whenever I do a talk, I ask my audience, what do you think buildings account for? And then I also say the whole aviation industry accounts for 2.5%. What do you think buildings account for? And I don't generally sometimes people get to the right answer, but basically it's about 40%.
Wow, that's way more than I thought.
Huge. It's actually 39 to be really precise. 28% of it is to do with energy use of our buildings, heating, powering them, heating, lighting, etc. 11% is to do with construction, so new construction. So the work that I do, I try and tackle both the 28% in terms of how we power the building, and then in the work that we do to do that, I try and tackle the 11% so that I'm maximizing the reduction in the impact of the work that I do. And just to give even more context on that, in London, it's way high. If you look at what the impact of the carbon impact of London, what that is, it's basically it's 68% of buildings account for 68% of London's carbon usage. Absolutely huge, with domestic buildings accounting for 35 to 40%. So anyone who's like wants to know what they can do to make, like anyone who's had the same feeling as me, which is, oh my goodness, we've got this climate crisis. What can I do to help? Obviously, there's things like not eating too much meat or reducing that, reducing flying. Then you're home.
They're so minuscule. Yeah, in comparison to the 40% or maybe 68% as you're describing.
The impact of our own homes is massive. And it also, you do that bit of work and then it lasts for 30, 40, 50 years. It's an ongoing impact. So it's really, really huge.
I think that is huge. And I'm really glad that we actually got that bit covered, because I think that's a very unknown fact, I'd imagine, by most people. And I think that that's probably the biggest impact that you're making with the niche that you're doing. And that's why it's so important. I wanted to end with just some quick fire questions. So there's no right or wrong answers. Just answer instinctively. Would you rather scale fast or build slowly?
Probably. I think I have to say build slowly, because that's all I can do at the moment. If I had a chance to scale fast, I probably would take it, but I'm not in that position currently.
Would you rather control everything or empower other people?
Empower other people.
Would you rather have safe growth or take a bold risk?
Mostly safe growth. If there was I'd say I probably stuck to safe growth.
What's more important to you, a profit or making an impact?
Making an impact.
There you go. Natalie, it's a final question that we ask everyone, and that is, when all of the plans fade, what is it that you would like to be remembered for building?
I'd like to be remembered for having an influence on the industry.
I think that you're already doing that, and I think that that's why I wanted you to come on the podcast so much, because it's such an unspoken about and potentially unknown thing that maybe feels so modern, or so people think, oh, it's all right just the way it is, we'll get by the way it is. But actually, there's a lot more responsibility and morality that you can do with your home that I think you've pointed out, and actually just make a more comfortable place to live. And I know we didn't speak about your beautiful design as well, but you can also make it so much more comfortable with the natural materials and all the things that you've mentioned. Now, if people liked everything that you spoke about, where could they find you and how could they reach out to you?
So it's very easy to Google Natalie Black Architect. I will come up. But my company is called ENBEE, spelled ENBEE, Architecture and Design. I've got Instagram, which is ENBEE Architecture. I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Natalie Black. I'm on Facebook under both my name and under ENBEE Architecture and Design. Yeah.
I'll drop all of those links in the show notes, so anyone that's seen it can click straight through to your Instagram, your website, your Facebook, and have direct access. And I really hope that they do reach out. Natalie, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And if anything, I feel a lot more educated on all of the sustainability aspects of housing in the UK. So keep up the good work and good luck for the future.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Let's stay in touch. Bye now.
Bye.